Okay, in week 4, we are looking at the life of Gustavus Vassa, who's often known by his birth name Walada Equiano. I'll return to that issue in a minute. We're doing this as a way of looking at the Bight of Biafra region in the 18th century particularly, and it gives an introduction to this part of Nigeria. We see it two ways. One, I'm going to talk about what the 18th century region was like, and second, we're going to have a PowerPoint presentation that will focus specifically on the life of Gustavus Vassa, and that will give you some sense of who this person was, why he was important, and how he relates to Africa. To begin with, we will have the text of the autobiography that Gustavus Vassa wrote and published in 1789 in London. That's a text that I have included in the Moodle readings. I don't expect you to read the whole thing. Some of you may already have read the whole thing. It's a literary masterpiece of the 18th century in the English language, written by somebody whose native language was not English. In fact, he didn't learn English until he was about 11 years old. And yet he wrote what is often considered to be one of the most important books, non-fiction books written in the end of the 18th century. Vassa's command of the English language was astonishing, which is one of the reasons that his autobiography is still taught in African studies courses and literature courses, and because he is an example of a particular type of writing from the late 18th century canon of British and English language literature. So in addition to being actually a quite famous writer, he was a political activist, an abolitionist, opposed to the slave trade and indeed opposed to slavery. He himself had been enslaved as a boy and had been taken to first Barbados and then Virginia before he was sold to a British ship captain, later a British naval officer in the 7 Years' War. And indeed, Vassa served much of his slavery period during the 7 Years' War, and he served as the personal attendant, steward, butler for his owner, who was a captain of every ship that he was on. And so therefore Vassa witnessed a number of very important major naval battles and engagements during the 7 Years' War while he was in slavery on board these ships, including, by the way, the British blockade of Louisbourg and the subsequent invasion of French Canada by British forces, which led to the occupation and then annexation of French Canada to the British Empire. And he was part of that event, for example, among others. That's the person he was. And when he was a slave, before his period of slavery, he lived in the interior of the Bight of Biafra, and it's for this purpose that we're really looking at his work, what he says about his own home country and what he remembers before age 11 about his home. And it's this that I want to use in this course to introduce what that area was like, because it was a very important source of enslaved Africans in the 18th century, especially on British ships and especially to British colonies, as Vassa himself, first going to Barbados and then going to Virginia, demonstrates. And this part of Africa, the Bight of Biafra, which is now in southern Nigeria, is the home of people who are ethnically identified as Igbo and others who are identified as Ibibio. And the principal difference between the two being language and nothing more. They're basically similar social structures and similar religious practices, but they're two different languages. The larger of the two, Igbo, was the one that Gustavus Vassa spoke as a child, and his birth name, Walada Equiano, which is the way many, many people know him. They don't know him by the name that was his legal name, which was Gustavus Vassa, and the name that he wanted to call himself, which was Gustavus Vassa. For various reasons, the modern scholarship has chosen to use his African name, even though that's something that he didn't want to do. So the PowerPoint will examine aspects of his life. The debate and the argument over his name is in an article that's I have assigned, which is on the course in the Moodle Moodle whatever it's called. In Moodle is an article by myself on Gustavus Vassa, Walada Equiano, what's in a name? Why does it matter whether we call him one thing or another, and what does it signify in terms of what we know about history? But finally, what you're going to be able to discern in some of the discussion, because of I examine in my article, for example, a number of customs that relate to the Igbo and Ibibio people during this period. You're going to understand that there was slavery in these societies. You're also going to understand that there was no centralized state. There was an ethnic group, a language, a commercial system, a legal system, but there was actually no centralized state at this time in this area. And Vassa's maturing as an individual, as an activist, as a literary individual living in London, influenced how he saw his background in his home. And that will enable us in this course on African history to really discuss a part of Africa where there were not centralized states.